I actually started getting shunned, and I'm like, okay, you act like I kicked your puppy. It's not that bad. Welcome to 33 Tangents, a roundtable discussion covering a wide variety of topics from digital analytics to working remotely to current happenings in business and technology. Your hosts, Jason Thompson, John Naran, Jen Coons, and myself, Jim Driscoll, all live in different areas of the world but work together in the same company. Our regular day-to-day conversations often go off in various directions, and the goal of this podcast is to share our ideas and find new ways to engage with others. All right, and now we're recording. So what's going on? You're rocking the beard there.
Yeah, it's pretty good, right? The word on the street is that I'm growing it out because Evan decided he's growing a beard out, and I honestly think it's the other way around because
It's
I
the
had
other
mine
way
going.
around. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Wasn't he just asking for
um,
advice of how to trim it and groom it and stuff?
yeah. YouTube, the content on YouTube is absolutely phenomenal. And I don't know how I tend to go on these like wild, like, what would you call it, adventures where I start with one video and then there's recommended videos and they're usually within like the same type of genre, but then there's one that's a little off and you click on that and before you know it you're an hour in and you started out watching like tutorials on how to do sleight of hand card magic, and then you're on something an hour later, which is how to shape your beard. I'm like, how did I get here? But
Right.
somehow I got there, and I was watching these tutorials on how to like shape and grow your beard. And I'm like I've been doing it wrong for like 20 years. I've been like shaving it just on the jawline because it helps frame my face because I have a fat face and it makes it look skinnier. And apparently you need a base, so you need to trim it down, you need to let it kind of grow down lower so I'm like, all right, I got to at least try that. So
Nice.
there
Well,
you go.
you should send
That's good to know
links
because
to Evan
I
for sure.
yeah, I've been doing the same thing for years, and I typically grow out the beard in October, like September, October, when it starts to get cold. So I am going to have to keep that in mind when I start to let it grow out.
Yeah.
I don't have
Yeah.
any. I don't have any beard stories. So
No. Okay. Well, then maybe we should shift to the prime topic. Although we could do a whole episode. Hila, you remember back at Spark Networks when Dave Benyon and I did the Whiskerino?
yeah, that's in November. No, no, that's
No,
the
that was the mustache one.
yeah.
So there was this thing called Whiskerino, and I can't remember how many months it was, but it was such a cool concept. And Jed, what was his last name?
Wells.
Jed Wells, such a creative genius, um, participated as well, and I think maybe a few others. So, but it was this worldwide group, and everyone day one shaved clean, and then you just let it go, and then you took pictures of the beard growth, but it was not just pictures. Like there were themes of certain weeks had a certain theme, and people would get super super creative of how they took photos of their beards. I should go and see if there maybe on the Wayback Machine or something. There's some
Oh, I'm
links to
sure
the
there is.
archives when when we did that, but that was super fun. That was super fun. All right,
Nice.
I didn't expect to be talking about beard stories today,
No,
but
it's just a fun thing to get us started, and really I don't. Unfortunately, this time it really doesn't give me much of a segue. So you kind of stumped me when it comes to coming up with a segue for our topic.
how about have you ever left a job because they wouldn't let you grow a full beard? And how did they
Well,
treat you when you did that?
well, I didn't leave the job, but my summer internship was with a minor league baseball team.
Oh, we
Uh,
know.
yeah. Oh yeah, you have some of the pictures. and chances are, by the time we're done recording this, a tweet will have gone out with me in the costume.
Surf? What was
the
it?
Atlantic City Surf.
Aha. Yeah.
And I've got some fun stories there. But the general manager, he wanted the staff like clean shaven, trimmed hair, everything, like no long hair, no facial hair, nothing. So of course I'm a 20-year-old college student, so there's times I'm just rolling out of bed and I don't shave, so I've got a little bit of scruff and Driscoll shave that, or I'm also living away from home, so I'm just kind of letting my hair grow out a bit, and like I get crap for like not having it trimmed up, and I'm like, okay, like it's not like I've got this unkempt mane, and I'm out in front of people. It's just a little bit longer than normal, or okay, so I've got a bit of facial hair. Like I just never understood it, but ultimately my time came to an end there. It was just like a 3-month summer internship.
Your future as a sports mascot never really formalized, but you had a lot of potential.
I did.
We're gonna have to link that up. I've linked it in at least one other podcast show notes where we have the picture of you in the costume.
Outfit.
Yeah.
And a buddy of mine gets a kick out of it every time you share that on Facebook and tag me in it.
It's so good.
Oh yeah, it was. Definitely some stories from there. But today's episode, the topic may come a little too soon, but I still think it's good. Maybe it will give us a good, a good emotional reaction to it. I want to talk about when an employee decides to move on. So, at this point, people know John Narang, was presented with an opportunity in Thailand, one that he couldn't turn down. So, unfortunately, he's no longer with 33 Sticks, but, again, we wish him all the best with the opportunity, and we're still going to have him on from time to time. I think it'd be great, topics in the future with him. But I think it's still very, very recent in all of our minds, and it's emotional, especially when you have a close knit group like we have. And if you think about it too, if you extrapolate it beyond us, in previous episodes we've talked about how the average tenure in the digital analytics space is about 18 months. So that means as an employer, as a hiring manager, you're bound to have times when an employee decides to move on, and your reaction to it makes all the difference. I know I've gotten various different reactions when I've decided to move on to a new opportunity. So I guess let's dive into this from a couple different areas. Let's talk about some of the reactions we've gotten maybe in other points of our career where we've given notice, as well as when we've gotten notice, like how we reacted.
So did you specifically plan this episode for this week? Because it's like a double gut punch, because I woke up this morning with a LinkedIn alert that John had updated his LinkedIn profile. I'm like, damn it.
I wanted to get it while the feeling was still fresh.
Yeah.
Not gonna lie.
It's good.
I did time it that way.
No, it's good timing. So who's going to start and jump in? But why is Hila not on camera though? That's the other.
I had good intentions, and then I started making breakfast, and then I wasn't ready for camera.
All right. So Jim, do you want to jump in with your experience?
Yeah, I've had a couple different experiences over my career as far as let's start with giving notice, because I think that sometimes really the reaction we get shapes how we look to treat it. I remember this one organization where I was there for that was a short period of time, but when I gave notice, my immediate manager was like, I knew you weren't long for here. This place is probably not where you're going to be. But there were a couple other of her peers that, I almost became shunned. I actually started getting shunned, and I'm like, okay, you act like I kicked your puppy. It's not that bad. So there was that. I mean, most of them have usually been positive, and it's the like a lot of times I've moved on just for a new opportunity. But that one in particular definitely sticks out just because I felt like I it, yeah, I just keep going back to like feeling like shunned, like you're leaving us, so we're just not going to talk to you anymore.
Yeah, it's really hard. And the arc of employment is is really interesting, because you've got this upfront when you're trying to recruit people to the company, and you put on your very best face, right? And maybe even over the top, maybe not lying, but stretching the truth of the reality, and people are so accustomed to that, and maybe that's a future episode. Um, and just because it's kind of fresh in my mind, I get a text from Bryant maybe once a week where he says something like, all right, I'm still waiting for the bait and switch. Because we've been so conditioned to that companies kind of put out this really good face as far as what you're getting into. Then there's the reality of it, after the honeymoon period ends. And then, almost exclusively, you have this really, really nasty breakup at the end. And I think I've had that for sure. I've had some good ones, but it's this weird human nature where we take it so personally, and it's business all throughout, and then all of a sudden it's this breakup that is absolutely personal, and we try to make it as personal as possible. And when I left Omniture, it was really, really challenging. And I should say overall it was a very positive experience, but it was not easy. And not that I was any kind of a linchpin or critical piece to the Omniture team, but over the 2 weeks before I left to join Spark Networks, where I ultimately crossed paths with Hila, it was really, really hard because I was pulled into all these meetings, and I was kind of given the talk of like, what are you doing? This isn't, best. Like, is it more money? We'll give you more money. We'll do this. We'll do that. And, it was really, really challenging, but thankfully it never got nasty, where it was an attack on a personal level, but it was still really challenging because they did make it feel personal. You're leaving your friends. You're leaving us behind. That's not cool, and that's really difficult to deal with. But ultimately, and I think my final kind of set of interviews were with my direct boss at the time, Bassam, who is building a company here in Park City, and he was awesome, and he said something that I think kind of stuck with me and kind of helped informed how we treated John's departure, where he said, I'm not gonna lie, we are super sad to see you go. We love having you part of the team, but we know that this isn't a breakup. We know that this isn't you hating Omniture and the people on the team, and in fact, we know that you're going to go out and do great things that ultimately is going to have a very, very positive impact on us. And that really meant a lot to me that he would say that, and again, I took that with heart, and I kind of made a mental note that if I was ever in Bassam's position, that I wanted to be as classy and stand up as he was, if I had employees leaving my team. So ultimately ended up being a really, really good experience.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Bryant because you want to talk about timing. He and I were just talking a little while ago, and he mentioned that same thing as well. Like he's like, yeah, every couple of days I start to wonder like when's the other shoe going to drop? Is it when's the bait and switch coming?
Yeah, and it's just, again, we've been conditioned that that's the arc of employment, where you're treated like royalty up front. There's the reality of it, which is the work, and then you have this, breakup at the end. And so, he's kind of waiting for that reality to kick in. But I think one of the things that we've gone out of our way to foster is just being completely upfront and transparent and saying, this is who we are, this is what it is, and when you get in there, that's going to be no different. And not only that, it's going to be no different when you leave. and hopefully we kind of helped proof that out with John leaving. I'm not gonna lie, it was is very difficult. I mean, we all miss working with him. He's a phenomenal talent. We love having him on the team, but ultimately, people are going to go off in different directions, and having that same kind of tie throughout the experience, whether it's trying to win new employees coming in, treating how you treat them during their employment, and then treating them at the end. It just seems like the right way to do things. But again, I think when you get human emotion involved, a lot of times we end up again take it personally, and unfortunately, that sometimes comes out in very ugly ways. Thankfully, not in our case this time, or hopefully ever.
So, when John, approached you about this, what was your like immediate reaction, like, internally, and then how did that manifest externally?
I was hurt. It made me a little sick to my stomach. My natural reaction was, um, did we do something wrong? But John was very upfront, and transparent in his journey, and really talking through it with a great deal of respect for what we're doing and what we're building out. So that helped. And again, I had to remember that. I wanted to go back, and I think I've mentioned it on previous podcasts where my very first job out of college, I got to a point where it was extremely depressing. I hated what I did. I didn't want to work in corporate anymore, and my way of coping was keeping a notebook of here's all the things that if I ever had the chance to run a company that I would do differently. And how you treat employees was high up on that list, and I had to remember, this is an opportunity to walk what we talk. And we've talked a lot about, in fact, that was actually part of the conversation with John. He said, this is really weird because like 2 weeks ago you posted something on LinkedIn about how you should treat an employee that leaves the company. Did and I was, at the time, accepting this other position. It's like you almost knew, and I'm like, dude, I had no idea. But he's like, now we're in that scenario, where you're gonna have to actually walk the walk of what you've been talking about. And so again, you hate to see that happen, but you understand it, and ultimately, you can talk all you want. You can write all these thought leadership posts all you want, but really what it comes down to is how do you execute on it, and do you actually do what you say you're going to do? And that's what we did in John's case, and I think overall it was a very, very positive experience for everybody involved.
When I talked to John, it was actually before John told Jason. So he kind of we chatted first, and my immediate reaction was like, "Oh no, take it back, take it back." Um, but then we started going. Well, we chatted about it and everything, and I think it was um not to speak for him, but I think, it was it wasn't an easy thing for him to, you know, to communicate that. And, we're kind of like a family, and we've worked before together. So it was a very unique situation for him to, this is the second time, I almost want to say third, but it's the second time that we worked together for sure as a team. And, so it wasn't lightly that, he, coming into this conversation to let me know. But then shortly after that, we went into like planning mode of how we're going to tell Jason, and kind of hypothesizing like what his reaction would be, and then going back to planning. And should he
So
start
what were the thoughts on what my reaction was going to be?
we didn't know. It was just kind of an unknown, and we didn't know if you're going to be upset or no, um not upset in like a bad way, but just the hesitation that uh like, wow, we've been on this journey together. And John has been with us since a very early part of 33 Sticks, and we're 6 years
Absolutely.
in. He's been here for the majority of that time, just like you have, Jim. And so it's very personal. It's very kind of like, wow, how do I explain the thought process that has gone through in the last couple of months to get here to make a decision to leave? How do I translate that to, you know, to Jason, to Hila? So I think it was kind of a big deal, and
Yeah.
we were mostly joking about it, but then we really decided, because I guess that it was more of a question of like, should we go into it together, or should he just talk to you directly? And I think we recommended to just have a personal conversation with you directly, which is what he did. Um,
Understood. Well,
yeah.
yeah, and I think it worked out well. And one of the other things, like Jim, you and I have talked about it, using the sports analogy, is that even going back to where I had people responsibilities, but it ultimately wasn't my company. I looked at it as the whole coaching tree analogy, where you have certain coaches that have become very influential across many teams and organizations, where they've brought up talent, they've really mentored them and got them to a place where they could go off and own their own thing, and they really take a lot of pride in that. And the one that comes to mind to me the most is Steve Walsh with the San Francisco 49ers. If you look at the coaches that have come out of his lineage, it's absolutely amazing. I'm like, that's so cool. I would love to have something like that. So even back before I had my own company, I looked at that when I had people management responsibilities, and that's very much in the back of my mind. And when the situation with John arose, that was there, and it's a decision you make that, am I going to make this a positive, or am I going to make this, ultimately a negative? And I guess there's something in between, where most people leaving is seen as a neutral. And what I wanted to do was have it be very positive, so that as John goes out, he takes the lessons he learned at 33 Sticks and the culture and the way of looking at work and life, and takes that and helps instill that in another company, and kind of helps expand our brand and our vision. I think that's a really, really cool thing. And I crave that much more than creating a very negative, where I treat an employee very badly that's leaving. They're absolutely going to go out and spread that message, right? And eventually that's going to permeate the market, and people are like, don't know that I want to go work for 33 Sticks because Jason was a real asshole to John when he left. So you have to think about those things. Those decisions you make as employees are leaving have a very real impact. And I think, fortunately for me, the decision weighs really, really heavily, because it's not just a job for me. This is our company, and it's, I take it very, very personally. So for me, maybe the decision's easier to treat employees the right way, but you have to think about that even as a people manager. Not only do you represent the business, and if you're treating employees poorly when they leave, it's going to reflect poorly on the business, but it reflects on you. So as you go on to your next job, you're going to start to develop that reputation of, I don't know if I want to work for Jason as a boss. I've heard some pretty nasty things out there. So it's not something to take lightly if you're in that position to impact the experience of employees as they're exiting the company that you're at.
Yeah, and this could be a completely just biased view of it, or maybe it's just it's not, not necessarily accurate, but it feels like you feel more of those negative stories than the positive stories. Where the person leaving got a very negative personal response.
Yeah.
What do you think, like in those cases where there is a negative response to it, the person who's responding that way, the hiring manager, what make what would cause them to take it so personally that they would react maybe out of anger, out of frustration?
It depends. But I think it comes down to just natural human emotion. And whether it's our company or not, whether we're been tasked with building out a team and we have direct responsibility for people, we take that very very personally. And it's we've grown out this relationship, and when someone comes to you and says, hey, I'm thinking about, or I'm taking another opportunity, rather than the initial reaction being one where we can sit down and think about it in terms of, okay, how does this impact the business, how do we do a proper transition, the immediate response is very emotional, very personal, that it's a reflection on us, that we're being dumped, we're the loser in the relationship. And that's really really hard. And when you get kind of thrown in that position, unless you're ready for it, unless you already have a framework for how you're going to deal with it, I think a lot of times your reaction is to be angry, to be upset, and to lash out because you feel hurt. And I think that's understandable, right? Like we don't want to be dumped. We don't want to feel like we're the loser, or someone's telling us, it's you. That's hard. And so if you don't have a plan for how you want to deal with those scenarios, a lot of times the default position is to react in a very reactionary, negative way of feeling hurt, and which again is completely understandable. It hurt when John left. It did. It hurt. It hurt me, but fortunately we had thought through those scenarios and had a plan. It was just a matter of now can we execute on that. But again, if you don't have a plan, the default often is very white hot emotion, and oftentimes that doesn't really reflect who we are, but does come out.
Yeah, and I think there's different stages that I think the employer kind of goes through, or the team even goes through, where like it's denial, or and anger, and then trying to convince. And maybe some companies are like a little threatening, like, wait a minute, you actually can't work for a competitor, and they look for negative things. And then I think at the end of each of those periods, if people typically give a 2 weeks notice when they're leaving, I think at the very end, no matter what, is the realization that it's actually happening, and we better scramble to do transition of whatever is needed at the last minute. It's unfortunate that that's how it plays out most of the time. I've seen it. Very rarely, but it does happen where like immediately they go into transition mode and it's very efficient. But mostly it's kind of like, okay, let's see how we feel about it. Let's talk about it more. Let's tell all the layers of management and see what they say. And then let's recognize
Yeah,
that it's
and
actually happening. So
and you bring up a really good point that I hadn't thought about, but I think part of it is that when it comes to it's such a contrast, and I'm going to go back to this kind of employment arc where when we're trying to win a new employee to join us, it's very personal. We want them to feel loved and accepted, and the emotion of it, and we might get about like, this is why we're such a cool company, why you want to be here. It's okay to have that emotion so clear and present. But you look at the bookend of the journey where they're leaving the company, and it's no longer okay to have that emotion, and it's just very clinical. Okay, we have this HR process, you go through this HR process, you do this, and it's like, why are we denying the fact that there is emotion involved here, and can we leverage that to have a much better transition? And the danger of kind of going down that clinical route, you brought up something, Hila, around, well, let's pull the agreements and see if they violated anything. That again, that's just coming back to the fact that people feel hurt, and we don't have a way of dealing with our emotions in a positive way. And I think a big part of it is accepting that everything we do is emotional, and it's okay. You know, we don't need to be these robotic corporate clones where we just go. It's okay to have feelings and think about how we address those in certain work situations. And if you do, you're better able to handle things that may be very challenging, like an employee leaving. And if you don't, then again, you dismiss that you have these emotions, but they come out almost over the top. And whether it's just direct emotion or leveraging things like the clinical, legal, HR way of leaving the company, you know, we may convince ourselves that we're looking at agreements to protect, quote, the company. You know, 99 times out of 100, it's probably bullshit. You know, there's no harm to be done. And we're really using it as a way to feel better about ourselves. It's like, you know, if we can exact a little bit of revenge, then we'll feel better that, you know, we got the upper hand. Again, if it's a breakup, we have to, you know, well, you know, here's your box of stuff, you take it, but I'm keeping this and I'm gonna win, you know, and it shouldn't be looked at as a win and a loss, right? And if we go back to the coaching tree analogy, if we're looking at it as a win and a loss, then we're always going to lose. But if we look at it as a positive and we're sending someone out into the world in a very positive way, to continue to spread our message and our culture and our way of doing business. And, you know, ultimately, who knows where that leads up? Do they end up referring business back to us? Do they end up referring really great people to come work for us? You can't do that if you're looking at the end of a relationship as a breakup with winners and losers, because, you know, you're just not going to have that that feel good connection to want to do something valuable after that relationship is in. And maybe that gets fixed over time as you patch things up on a personal level, but man, that's an uphill battle.
Yeah, and to be fair, I think for some companies and um, you know, some contributors are major contributors. So it is an actual um, produces an actual gap and a pain for the company, and sometimes puts at risk a critical component within a company, depending the size or the dynamics. So it's a very, you know, understandable reaction to kind of freak out a little bit. I mean, 2 weeks is not much to realign resources. It takes a long time to
Yeah.
find the right people and, you know, to get them in the right, you know, positions to be successful in the first place. And so when somebody leaves, it produces like an immediate gap that is really, really hard to kind of think through how to close that gap, or how to identify another person that would, you know,
No, yeah.
automatically
It
know all
it's
the things and
It
and be
it's
ready
it's
to
true, but
forge forward.
on the flip side, how valuable is it to waste that 2 weeks
Oh, for
trying to
sure,
convince someone to stay where they've already made the
for
decision?
sure,
You know, you're just kind of wasting your time of like trying to court them back. They've already made the
for
decision,
sure.
but we waste all that time trying to say, you know what, I'm not believing what you're saying, and I'm going to try to convince you to change your mind. And then
Hmm.
on top of that, you know, how valuable is it to just be a jerk during that? Like, none of those things have value. So while I don't want to discredit the fact that it is hard, and sometimes it does put a company in a very precarious situation, we still have to find a way to think positive and logical about it. Otherwise, ultimately the end state's going to be the same. And if we can't focus on trying to make it a very positive experience, we end up losing anyway. So what's the point?
Yeah.
I mean, we may feel better in the moment, but it's not going to
Agreed.
work long term, right?
Agreed.
Agreed. And actually, that kind of leads into my next question. So, continuing to use this as an example, did you at any point consider like making a counteroffer, convincing John to stay? Did you have any of those thoughts or even conversations around it?
No, no. I mean,
Okay.
as much as I would much rather have him here today and on this podcast, um, I trust John. I trust that the only thing I questioned was, is there something fundamentally wrong with what we did? Did we do something negative? If so, then I want to be able to address that. But in general, I trust our employees are making very smart, informed decisions on what is good for them, and it's not my place to try to undermine that. I care too much about our employees to do that, and if John has made a decision that at this point in his career this is what's best for him, I have to trust that he's making the right decision, and the only position I can take is to support him in that. And so for me to go at him and try to get him to second guess it, to maybe throw more money at him, to do something, I think would be completely unfair of me to do that. And again, while that may be what my natural instinct is, and it isn't, but it may be the natural instinct to do that. For me, I just felt like that's the wrong thing to do. And I want to be fully supportive of him. So no, it never crossed my mind to try to talk him out of it, to listen to his reasoning and reverse engineer it and debate him on it, to throw more money or perks or something at him to get him to stay. I trusted he was making the right decision, and I supported him in that.
Yep, and the reason I ask is that tends to be the other major reaction someone gets when they give notice that they're moving on. It's the, well, wait. Let's see if we could do something for you. You know, here's more money. Here's this. Here's that. And you know, from an employee perspective, time and time again, that usually does not work out. Because if they're trying to woo you with more money, a lot of times that's just a temporary Band-Aid, and the real reason you decided to move on, eventually comes back up again.
Yeah, and I've rarely seen it work out, and in fact, I've seen it create a lot of negativity. And being on the other side of that coin, where the management team has offered perks, money, whatever, and it's been accepted, I will tell you that oftentimes there's a very, very negative connotation to that. That you felt like you were trapped and you were forced to do something, and now you're mad about that. You know, so after the kind of rush of the wind that you were able to save this employee wears off, there's anger, and you're like, you know, you kind of hold it. People hold it against employees, and whether they're willing to admit it or not, that kind of hangs over their head. So you may have won the employee, but now maybe you're tougher on that employee. Maybe when quarterly reviews come around, you start to, you know, mark them down, and it may be something where you're actually trying to do that, but a lot of times I think it's subconscious. It seeps in. So, you know, I've just never not to say that hasn't worked out in the past. I'm sure there are examples where it's worked out, but by and large, the experiences that I've been exposed to, it hasn't worked out long term, and eventually the employee ends up leaving anyway after a short period of time.
So I have one final question for you both around this. So, have you ever had a time where, and this is going to be a controversial question, where, you know, employee gives notice, and your internal reaction is like, yeah, this is probably a good thing for the both of us?
I don't know. I don't think. I can't think of one. I can't think of one personally. So, no.
What, a departure where it was a good decision for both the company and the
For
person?
both sides.
Yeah, so someone gave notice, and you're pretty much like, yeah, this is probably a good thing that we part ways.
Well, I mean, I had one. They were probably, I'm not sure they were happy to see me go, but it was good timing for me to leave. So yeah, I can say that even though it was a good thing, and they were kind of like just kind of said, yeah, okay, that makes sense, because they knew I was ready for the next step, and you know, it wasn't a good fit for their culture for me to stay and pursue what I really wanted to do. I think their reaction was so you can imagine if I left somewhere and the culture wasn't good for me. It was very corporate, very, very corporate. Mm-hmm. So one of the immediate reactions that I got when I gave notice there was, oh, you know, who pulled you into that new job? Because one of their previous employees who was in a very prominent position, went to this other company that I was leaving for. And so their immediate reaction was almost like a legal thing, like, oh, did they poach you? They weren't supposed to, let's pull their legal documents to make sure, like, what did they do here? And it was not the case, it was not the case. So it was interesting. So even in the scenario where it was clearly the best for both sides for me to kind of move on to something that fits better and can make me more successful and just stay out of their way and their culture. This still, I think the nature of their culture being so corporate was to like, wait a minute, is there some legal thing to pursue here? Which is kind of unfortunate and very, very symbolic of the reason that it was time for me to go. So for sure.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, and again, I think I don't know that there's been many where it's just been a mutual fit, but again, I want to go back to for me, it's about how you look at that as a not an end, but a transition. And am I going to make a decision to have this positive or negative? Because just personally being on the employee side, man, I don't know. Maybe Omniture was the only one, and it wasn't great because again, I kind of had to go through the gauntlet of being made to feel bad and question whether I'm making the right decision, and so it wasn't ideal, but it was probably the best of all of them. And the rest of them were on like a scale of absolutely horrific to pretty negative, and it's like if that stretches out over my 20-year career, and if that is anything like what everyone else is facing, this sucks. Like, is really everyone is facing for the most part every time they leave is a very negative thing. I don't want to do that. So maybe no, for sure our impact is very small. We're a small team, and I don't know how much weight our voice has in the business world, probably very little. But if we can make even a small impact and try to do things different, to me that feels good. And I'm sure there are people out there, and I would love to hear stories of very positive experiences of making transitions. But just personally, mine were, I would say, all negative on some degree, and I don't want to create that here. I would like, as with many things we do, to do the opposite of what I firsthand experienced in the corporate world. So that's all I got.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what else. I think we've really kind of beaten this to death. So I guess we could start to start to wrap up. So, like, what do you think are maybe some some bits of advice, for either an employee or an employer, um, yeah, that to make this more of a positive thing or less of a burdensome thing, because I know for as an employee, I mean, the times I've decided to move on, like, it was a nerve wracking thing leading up to that conversation.
Yeah, it's. I think ultimately the onus is on the management side. It really shouldn't be on the employee side. I think in most situations, employees are looking at things from a best interest standpoint, and oftentimes go out of their way to make sure transitions are smooth. And it's oftentimes the employer management side that screw things up. And it's really the onus is on them to make this a positive experience. So I would say if you're in a position of people management, that this is something that you really need to think about. This isn't something that to most people comes naturally. And again, if we're going to take our position as just being a natural reaction, unfortunately, oftentimes that is very negative. That it's a very emotional thing, and we're negative, and we're gonna fight. And so my piece of advice would be, if you're in a management position, to really think critically about how you would respond and how you respond. and how you can make this a positive experience, because again, not only does it reflect on the company you're representing, it reflects on you personally as a leader. And if you develop the reputation that you may treat your employees one way when they're there, but treat them another way on their way out, that's going to get out, and it's going to make it more and more difficult throughout your career to attract good people to work with you. Because while we would love to have amazing people stay with us for forever, we have to be realistic that it's not the reality. And so we have to figure out how to react in a better way when people do leave, because it's going to have an impact on what we want to do, both in the near term, but I think the bigger impact is in the long term on what it has as far as an impact on our ability to do what we want to do. Nothing we do is alone. And so if we're constantly alienating smart and talented people, that's going to limit the pool of resources that we have available to create amazing things in the future. So, if you're in that position, you have a lot of responsibility to do it right. It shouldn't be put on the burden of the employee. I think 9 times out of 10, employees leave the right way. It's management that screws it up.
Yeah.
Hila's just going to give me a yep. She's in agreement.
I agree. And I'm glad this conversation didn't focus on kind of the negative examples where employers kind of tried to lash out, and we talked about it a little bit, but I think that
and there are lots of them. We could have personally just shared our own personal ones, and it could have taken up the whole time. But I think everyone probably has either firsthand or really close secondhand knowledge of very negative things that happen. So it doesn't really help to focus and just kind of reiterate those. I think it's more important to focus on it can be done another way.
Especially as we talk about how short the tenure can be. We're not talking about a space where someone stays in a job for 10 years or more. We're talking about people that move on every 18 to 24 months. So this is going to be a frequent conversation. And so, yeah, if it could be something where it could be done, if we could talk about how to do it gracefully, I think it could be a positive.
Yeah. Agreed.
For sure. Great conversation. Again, I think timing is tough because it is still very fresh and raw with John leaving, but I think it's a great time to talk about it and talk about the process that we've gone through, and again, I think ultimately, while we're all very sad that he's going off and doing something new, we're all very excited for him and really are supporting him, and that's not just words. It's truly how we operate, and I hope that people are listening, specifically people that have direct people management responsibilities and influence, take something positive away from this, that they have a really unique opportunity to do things differently, and they may think their impact is small, but it definitely grows. The coaching tree grows, and it's very real. So make some wise decisions to grow that out in a very positive way.
Very, very well said. And yeah, we'll have John on in a couple of weeks. I'm curious to see how his first few weeks went at the new gig as an expat. I think it's going to be a really fun conversation. So we'll have him on in a few weeks.
Yeah, he definitely wants to make sure he can still record with us at least every once in a while, for sure.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah,
that's the plan. So cool. Well, I appreciate the time as always, and we'll go ahead and wrap up for now.
Thanks, guys.
All right. See you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. We hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to reach us, you could do so by emailing podcast@33sticks.com or on the web at www.33sticks.com. The 33 Tangents podcast is a production of 33 Sticks.